People from all over the world know the River Thames as an iconic symbol of London and the south of England at large. Yet despite its global fame, the waterway also has its secrets. Not many people know, for instance, that the river is absolutely littered with old shipwrecks that have sunk to its bed. And even fewer people know just how dangerous some of these wrecks are. Experts issue warning after the wreckage of a sunken U.S. supply ship gets analyzed. The SS Richard Montgomery was an American cargo ship that was constructed back in 1943. The following year it was sent over to Britain, where it was then due to travel towards France. It never made it that far, however, because it ended up getting stuck in a sandbank in the Thames estuary. This was a calamity with immediate and severe consequences. The ship began to break apart, meaning that it quickly became clear it couldn't be saved. So an operation was launched to remove the ship's cargo in time before it sank. But the team charged with the job was unable to clear out the vessel before parts of it became submerged. The ship soon sank, eventually coming to rest at the bed of the river. But a great deal of its cargo had stayed on board, and now nobody could retrieve it. It would stay there, stuck in the Thames estuary, right up to our present day. In fact, if you looked out at the right spot, you'd see the vessel's mast sticking out from the water. You might wonder why nobody's ever made an attempt to salvage this old ship, given that it's been there for so many decades now. But the truth is that retrieving the ship is far too risky for anybody to attempt. And that has everything to do with the extraordinarily destructive cargo that remains on board to this day. The SS Richard Montgomery was built as World War II continued to rage across the globe. It was produced by a company in Florida, which also made more than 2,700 other vessels of the same class. These boats were intended to help with the Allies' war effort by transporting essential cargo from place to place. This particular vessel had been named after an Irish soldier who fought for the British Army. Richard Montgomery the man saw a lot of action in North America during his time, most notably in Pontiac's War and the French and Indian War. He later took on a leadership role for the Continental Army as the Revolutionary War unfolded, which ultimately led to his death. The ship that was later given Montgomery's name left America in 1944, burdened with a significant cargo. It set out towards Britain, with the stop after that intended to be France. The first part of the journey went off without a hitch, as the vessel made it to the Thames estuary. From there, though, things started to go badly wrong. On August 20, 1944, the SS Richard Montgomery ran into some serious trouble. As it was sailing through the Thames estuary, the ship's anchor started to drag along the bed beneath it. This proved disastrous, and the entire vessel ended up becoming firmly trapped in a sandbank. And things weren't going to get any better. With the Richard Montgomery now totally stuck in the estuary, it was quickly decided that its cargo should be removed. Teams of people set about doing this, but the integrity of the vessel was always worsening as they worked. It soon started to crack open, allowing lots of water to gush in. The salvage mission did have some success, however, because roughly 50% of the load had been retrieved from the sinking ship by September 25. But that was the best that could be done. With the other half of the cargo still on board, the Richard Montgomery became almost totally submerged. So attempts to get any more stuff off the vessel were called off. Thus the SS Richard Montgomery sits in the Thames estuary to this day, not far from a town called Sheerness in the county of Kent. It's even possible to see the wreck from land, as its masts actually poke out of the water. You'd imagine that all of the 12,000 inhabitants of Sheerness, then, are more than familiar with the sunken ship. But those residents might be forgiven for feeling more than a little uneasy about their town's proximity to the vessel. The SS Richard Montgomery was, after all, transporting a dangerous hull when it became trapped in the sandbank all those decades ago. In short, it was loaded with thousands of tons worth of explosives. It might seem crazy that a sunken ship containing so many explosives would be left to rot for so long, especially without some kind of resolution. The thing is, though, there's actually a pretty negative precedent for this sort of thing. In 1967 efforts were made to remedy a similar situation, but the meddling caused the sunken ship to explode. The ship in question was the SS Kiels, which was transporting munitions from England to Germany in 1946. Along the way, the ship ran into trouble and ended up sinking. It remained in place for 2 decades before efforts were made to finally remove all the explosive materials on board. But this move directly led to the Kiels blowing up. And the resulting explosion was so intense that it actually registered as an earthquake as far as 5,000 miles away. Plus it left a massive crater, said to measure over 150 feet in length, almost 70 feet in width, and around 20 feet in depth. This gives you an idea of just how powerful that blast had been. It turns out that this explosion was directly caused by those charged with dealing with the wreck. Because during that period in the mid-1960s, it was actually standard practice to blow up shipwrecks to clear them from waterways. But in this case it was underestimated how much explosive material was still on board. So the explosion was way bigger than those responsible had expected. Oops. Thus the sheer impact that unfolded with the SS Kiels served as a stark warning to those trying to figure out what to do with the Richard Montgomery. This led to decades of inaction, meaning that to this very day the ship remains in place. And it still has all those explosives on board. More than 75 years after it sank to the bottom of the Thames estuary, the Richard Montgomery is still a huge threat. In theory, the ship's load could go off at any moment, especially if it's interfered with. So the wreck and the area immediately close by have been clearly highlighted with warnings. Estimates suggest that the SS Richard Montgomery is home to something like 1,400 tons worth of explosives today. This total is made up of different varieties of munition, some of which are presumably more powerful than others. Taken together, though, their combined destructive potential is extremely worrying. If something were to spark these explosives, the resulting damage would be absolutely devastating. According to experts' projections, the blast would initially cause a small tsunami that would sweep through the area at a height of up to 16 feet. As you can imagine, this would lead to severe floods on land. Aside from the intense floods, the explosion would reverberate through any nearby urban areas, such as Sheerness. Windows would smash because of the vibrations, with potentially horrifying consequences for anybody standing close by. Plus shipping in the area would be severely disrupted, which itself would have an economic impact. Naturally, authorities wish to avoid such a grim scenario from ever unfolding. That's why the wreck is regularly monitored, with risk assessments trying to keep a handle on the situation. According to such evaluations, the main danger is that the Richard Montgomery could shift so dramatically that it goes off. The wreck could move for a variety of reasons. For example, another ship sailing through the Thames estuary could drift off course and smash into it. Or the vessel could move as it deteriorates further. After so many decades underwater, the ship is hardly in the best shape these days. In the immediate decades following the SS Richard Montgomery's grounding, risk assessments were conducted by divers swimming around the wreckage. As the years went by, though, more technological solutions were found to help keep on top of things. This meant that it was less necessary to send people swimming towards such a dangerous wreck. So with a few exceptions, the risk assessment surveys are generally carried out with the help of sonar technology nowadays. It means the authorities charged with dealing with the wreck are able to get a broad sense of how it's holding up. Plus they can see the state of the wreck's surroundings. But in 2020 word started to spread that one of the assessments had come back with some worrying news. The wreck was really beginning to deteriorate now, with cracks opening up. Parts of the ship had even started to break apart and sink to the riverbed. This was an alarming development, especially for those who live not far from the Richard Montgomery. Because if the ship was becoming less and less stable, then the chances of one of the explosives going off were much higher. And if one bomb goes off, it's possible they all will. Another worry for the authorities is the ship's masts, which can be seen from land. It's been argued that these are so tall that they're actually putting a lot of tension on the wreck as a whole. A possible solution to this problem, then, would be to trim down these masts. In 2020, the British Maritime and Coast Guard Agency sought bids from companies willing to do this task. Yet such a move could inadvertently cause one of the munitions to go off, so the risk remains. The plan so far is for the masts to be removed come 2022, as reported by website Kent Online. Despite the dangers of reducing the masts, it's actually happened before. Because back in 1999 the same issue about rising tension in the ship owing to the masts also arose. And on that occasion, the issue was dealt with and no disaster occurred. So maybe it would be safe to do so again, let's hope. It's definitely a risk, though, and few seem keen on interfering too much. The issue has also caused a stir in the British Parliament. Yet, there are government officials who think it best to leave the wreck as it is. As one such politician remarked, the cargo is likely to be stable if left undisturbed. The politician, Baroness Barron, went on to claim that the explosives inside the ship are now likely to be harmless. She said, "We believe that the TNT is likely to be inert because the fuses have degraded over time." Critics of such thinking, however, have pointed out that inactive fuses don't necessarily mean the explosives are no longer working. Thus, there are other politicians desperately calling for action to be taken. They see the Richard Montgomery and its cargo as an unacceptable threat that needs to be dealt with. In their minds, the odds of a calamity are just too high as things stand, while the ship deteriorates further with time. But for the time being, it seems, the approach being taken remains a cautious one. It's claimed that the vessel is unlikely to blow up anytime soon, but it will nonetheless be carefully monitored. If drastic changes are recorded, it seems further courses of action will then be explored. The signs aren't very encouraging, though. In recent years it's become increasingly obvious that the ship is, indeed, succumbing to the ravages of time. Plus its surrounding environment is itself undergoing some changes. Surely, then, the issue of what to do with the SS Richard Montgomery can't be ignored forever? Somebody will hopefully step up to the challenge of dealing with the aging wreck, though it won't be a straightforward job. Because there's no doubt how tough this task would be. Such an operation would take months to complete, plus the potential for an explosion would have to be considered carefully. With the sheer amount of explosives still on board the SS Richard Montgomery, an explosion would be immense. Its radius would be so big, in fact, that it's been suggested people within 25 miles of the ship would be affected. So if works were taking place on the ship, everyone in this area would have to be evacuated. Given that the town of Sheerness falls into this area, it's easy to appreciate how big a logistical nightmare it would be to evacuate. It makes it even clearer to see why the authorities have proven so reluctant to do anything about the old, rotting ship. But for how much longer can they ignore the issue? Nobody really knows yet how the story of the SS Richard Montgomery will end. There's a chance that the ship will stay where it is forever, rotting away but never sparking an explosion. Or, perhaps the ship's condition will deteriorate so much that drastic action will be required. So this really is a wait and see what happens scenario, in the truest sense. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.